Today, my friend, you are in for a very special treat. And this episode deserves a little bit of a setup. So bear with me. We'll get to the super juicy content here really, really soon. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Amanda Walsh, and I'm the founder of Astrology Hub. Welcome to our podcast. Now, it's not every day that we get two legendary astrologers in the same room at the same time and that we get to ask them our most burning questions. But that is exactly what happened when these two master astrologers got together in London. I'm honored that they agreed to take time out of their busy schedules and to record this special edition podcast episode that I now get to share with you. In preparation for our time together, I asked our inner circle members, if you had these two astrologers in a room together, Rick Merlin Levine and Steve Judd, what would you ask them? I received over 40 questions from our members, some about the astrology we're about to embark upon in 2025 and 2026, and some more personal in nature. Of course, we did not have time to ask all the questions, but the ones that we did, their answers are pure gold. If you are interested in understanding why they both say the astrology of the next 2 years is the most important we will ever experience in our lifetimes, what astrological transits have made them come to that conclusion, and what advice they give to not only survive, but thrive through the accelerated changes ahead, you're going to love this episode. And make sure you stick around to the end. We've put together a series of outtakes of behind the scenes moments that are just classic. I think you're going to love it. Now, we're going to go to the interview next. And when we do, you'll notice that we skip any pleasantries and go right into the questions. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. And I hope this episode serves you on your path during this epic moment in time. If you could give us one piece of advice for how we can survive and thrive in the coming couple of years and beyond, what would that be?
You do it.
Become more fluid in yourself. Don't take yourself too seriously. Cultivate humor and don't get hung up. It's all about being adaptable, self-tolerant, self-acceptant, and flexible.
Go ahead.
No, finish.
I have two answers. One is, I can't help it. Think cosmically, act locally. And the second, there's a Hopi prophecy that you can Google and find on the internet, but it basically says something like the ancient Hopi prophets have said that there will be a time when the rivers will run fast. That time is now. Don't hold on to the shore or you will be torn asunder. Push away from the shore into the middle where the current is rapid. Keep your head above water. Look around and see who's there. This is your new family. Be joyful. That's it.
Other people call it going with the flow. I call it flow with a go. Flow with a go.
I like that because going with the flow is something that only dead fish do.
Flowing with a go means you've got a rudder and you can direct.
You got to
yourself.
run it. That's right.
But yesterday in my interview with Rick, we were talking about how the invention of a telescope revolutionized astronomy and astrology, and how the church banned people from looking through the telescope because it was the work of Satan.
It was the work of Satan because there were spots on the sun, and the church knew that the sun was perfect and there couldn't be spots on it. Therefore, the telescope was satanic. And that's part of why Galileo was house arrested.
All right. So there's a few questions about something that you've brought up several times, Rick. And so I would love to ask the question and then see, Steve, if you're seeing the same thing and if you're agreeing on this. But the question is around this idea that right now we have more of a capacity to impact change in our lives and in the world. And that after 2026, that might not be as much of the case. That things will be a little more set in a direction.
Before Steve takes his position, I would even say after next week, next month, the 1st of January, 2025, mid-January, 2025, I think that right now we have a lot of ability to impact an outcome, whatever an outcome might be, and that over the weeks, months, and years ahead, that outcome will be more difficult to undo whatever it is that's been done. And Steve may have a very different take on that and or the timing.
From my perspective, the acceleration of evolution that's going on at this time, the exponential acceleration in consciousness enhancement that seems to be happening globally, not just through astrology, but particularly notable through the numbers of new astrologers and the way that astrology is impacting on so many people's lives now. It does tell me we're reaching a kind of nexus point of transformation where we either break down or break through. And I slightly differ from Rick in that, to my mind, the latest timing for this is more likely to be the second quarter of 2027. But that's at the very latest. Realistically, it's next year and the following year. This is it. This is the most important time of human history.
And of course, even if you read like Nietzsche, you know, in the real sense of Nietzsche's work, he talked about how the human being, and this is in the 19th century, was actually not the endpoint of evolution. He used the word overmensch or supermensch. That was that humans were in a transition from what was human into some species that is not yet here. And so in a way, you know, with the advent of AI or ASI, that's artificial superintelligence, there's such a shift going on right now that we are at the turning point that, given, you know, the change over the next year or two or three, which, like the lag of seasons, takes a while for the longest day of the year to become the hottest day of the year, the changes are occurring now and next week and next month and next year and the year after. But it may take years or decades or even centuries for the after effects to kind of build and for this to process into what it's becoming.
If I were to try and simplify all this into one simple short sentence.
Oh, good.
I'd say that more of our brain is coming online.
And perhaps less of our ego is, or more of our ego is going offline.
Wow. Okay. And is Pluto moving into Aquarius? I know this could go way deep, but if you had to simplify, is it Pluto's move into Aquarius that's the main reason why you're saying that?
It's one of many things, but it's certainly partly that.
I am so looking forward to having Uranus in Gemini trying Pluto in Aquarius for 2 years. That is going to totally revolutionize our technological abilities, both in terms of software and hardware.
And in fact, Uranus is already trining Pluto.
Yes.
I mean, you know, the fact that it'll become more palpable once Pluto is back into Aquarius. Of course, right now it's temporarily doing remedial studies back in seeing what it didn't deconstruct to reconstruct in Capricorn. But once Pluto moves into Aquarius, and then when Uranus moves into Gemini, Aquarius and Gemini will be trined by sign. But already, you know, Pluto is at 29 degrees of Capricorn, and Uranus is at 27 degrees of Taurus. They're already 2 degrees within trine, and we're getting the inklings of all of that. And as important as that is, because remember, this is the first trine aspect between Uranus and Pluto since their conjunction that defined the 1960s. And so whatever it was that was defined in the 1960s and then came into the square through the 2010s, but 2012 to 2015, that those reactivation, re-stimulation of what was going on in the 60s, all these things came back into being, but that was still a square. And now that we're moving into a trine, it's these elements between the deepest bacchanalian, hidden, unconscious, underworld, internal stuff, and the explosion of the lightning into the electrical awareness, this trine, which is, Steve said, is going to last for a couple of years. I'm suggesting that it's already having its activity. And although I wouldn't argue that it's exact for a couple of years, just like the Uranus-Pluto square was exact 2012 to 2015, it was operative from 20 to 2020.
Yeah.
And the same will be true of the trine. And I'm sure Steve can say a whole lot more about this, but not only is it the Uranus-Pluto trine, but at the same time, with Saturn making its conjunction with Neptune, which it does every 45 years, it never does that at 0 degrees of Aries.
The very start.
And it's doing that exactly at the midpoint of the trine between Uranus and Pluto, because they're going to be at 0, 1, 2, 3 degrees of Aquarius and 0, 1, 2, 3 degrees of Gemini. And now we have Saturn and Neptune coming into that same point, making sextiles with it. And then by July of 2026, Jupiter moves into 4 degrees of Leo, and we have Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto making trines and sextiles with each other. And maybe Steve has. I've looked back a couple thousand years. I've never seen that happen like that before.
I've gone back to 10,000. I've gone back. I've used the software. I've taken it back to 6,500 BC. And there's never been a time like this. And even if there has been a time like this, the archetypes that represented by Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto have not been in the consciousness. They've been an undiscovered force. So this has never happened. And this is never going to happen again.
And because of the technology that we have with the instantaneity of feedback that we create as these major events occur, and we're all recording it and watching it and replaying it and having conversations like we're having now that people all over the world are seeing, this level of self-feedback, of awareness is a brand new thing, never before.
She does have another 38 questions.
Oh.
Where do our values come in here? You know, when you're saying flow with the go, is there any part of who we are or the way that our perspective or our values, any part of that remains intact, or are you seeing a complete overhaul?
No, of course not. Of course, we'll retain identity, we'll retain individuality, we'll retain consciousness. It's just will become more enhanced, more intuitive, more sensual, more receptive, more artistic, and more compassionate.
And I think the last thing is the most important in there. Remember, Nietzsche, the word nihilism, actually, as defined by Nietzsche, is those things which are the highest values, let's say, like God, reaches a point where they begin to deconstruct and fall to the bottom, where they have to be rebuilt up again. This is really what we're going through, is our old values in a way are being re-evaluated. However, I come back to the Dalai Lama, when asked in the complexity, of Buddhism, said, what is your religion? He said, my religion's kindness. Period. End of deal. End of story.
The idea of random acts of kindness, which has been sweeping the globe in the last 5 years, is a wonderful thing. People just spontaneously doing things that help other people's lives for no reason than just being kind.
I even like calculated acts of kindness.
Yeah, that's nice too. Yeah.
Not just random.
But the randomicity.
Think about it. And then, but I think that when it comes to values, that there are terms that have been co-opted, concepts like family values, whatever. And we could go down a list of things, but there are real values there, but they're not the way they have been co-opted. And that's really what we're looking at as being deconstructed and reconstructed. Even the concept of God and radical theology and the God is dead movement and all of that, it's not about no God. It's about taking the God that we've created, because gods are always culturocentric. And therefore, these concepts are going through a deconstruction and reconstruction. And so from that standpoint, our values, and I think one of the words that Steve used, and if not, I will throw it out there, and that's flexibility. In our ability to be compassionate, we have to be flexible enough to know that even though you have very different conclusions about certain sets of data than I do, there's a reason why you have that. And rather than me just saying you're stupid or you're other than or you're wrong, it's how did you arrive there? How did you get there? Because ultimately, you and I may, and I don't mean you personally, Amanda, but you, the other, and I may actually want to get to the same place. We're just going about it differently.
Alternatively, one planet, 8 billion different worlds.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So this is a more global question from Karen. The energy in the planets is there regardless of the human conditions. Is there a central desire or spiritual energy to move towards the good in all planetary movements? In other words, when bad things happen, is it intended to push more for the right/good results?
I don't think the planets have that element of consciousness where they can say this is good or that is bad. There is a sense of purpose. There's certainly a sense of pattern in the solar system and the universe beyond that. And there certainly is a plan for evolution, but good and bad are such limiting terms. I'm afraid I have problems with that question, because as soon as you start saying that something's good or something's bad, it's a value judgment.
Well, and what's good for the goose is not necessarily what's good for the gander.
Absolutely.
Meaning that I like to use the image of the astrology of a particular day, the weather. If you are a sun worshiper, and you have a weekend off, you want that to be sunny because you want to go to the beach and you want to basically soak in the sun. That's a good day. If you're a duck, weekends that are sunny suck because all the humans come out with their stinky chemicals. If you're a duck, the ideal good day is a day that's cloudy and rainy and wet because you get to have the run of the beach yourself. And so I agree with Steve that good and bad, there's a Dylan line, good and bad, I define these terms, something like, I was so much younger than I'm older. I was so much younger than I'm so much older than I'm younger than that now. No, there's that thing about good and bad. The planets don't have good and bad. Now, what might be good, here's an example. The plastic ocean in the Pacific. Anyone who's intelligent looks at that and says that plastic that we've created is there and not disintegrating, and that's horrific. However, we don't know the long-term evolutionary trajectory. And for all we know, Gaia or evolution has some process by which on every planet where carbon-based life develops, eventually those carbon-based life forms eventually become based upon long-chain polymers that have to do with the conversion of carbon into plastic-like materials so that then we live 1,000 years instead of 100 years. Now, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying that we have such limited perspectives on everything that our judgments of good and bad are somewhat arbitrary. However, when we talk about kindness or compassion, we can then make more local, immediate judgments on what may be considered to be good or bad. If you're hurting someone, I can say that's bad. Now, let's say I don't know that the person that you're hurting just hurt 10 other people. Does that become good? It's complicated.
Maybe she is referring more to loving, kind, compassionate. Do you think the planet's consciousness is loving in nature, kind in nature, compassionate in nature? And so are the transits that happening moving us in that direction, or is it more neutral? Like, is it just our choice? Or
I would suggest neither. I would suggest that if you look at it from a truly macrocosmic perspective, that the universe is loving, but the planets are just agents of change or agents of stimuli. And that the evolutionary process is ultimately about whether we choose to embrace love or whether we choose to live in fear. So the idea that the universe knows love, yes, because that's surely the reason why it's in existence in the first place. The idea of unity, universe, unity. And we can aspire to become agents of the universe. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I have nothing to say else. I agree.
I love that.
Hey there, I hope you're loving this episode. Just a really quick invitation before we get right back to the content. Steve Judd is our current Inner Circle astrologer teacher, guiding our members through the Scorpio lunation with an intimate, live, new and full moon forecast, a mastery class teaching on Pluto, and live chart reading demonstrations and Q&A. And in celebration of this, we're offering you the chance to try the membership for $1 only for your first month for a limited time. At the end of your dollar trial, you'll have the opportunity to maintain your membership at 50% off the normal membership rate. And to make this offer sweeter than ever, when you become a full member, you're also going to get access to Rick Levine's bonus mastery class that he just taught our members several months ago on Mercury. This offer ends on November 6th, so go to astrologyhub.com/inner circle and experience the inner circle with Steve Judd as your mentor for only $1. We'll put that link in the show notes as well. And now back to the episode.
Okay, so Claire says, have either of you had any defining mystical experiences or synchronicities occur that have left you feeling that there truly is something greater out there?
How long you got?
Yeah. I mean, are you talking about today or yesterday or last week or last month or over the decades? I think it was Einstein who said either nothing is a miracle or everything is a miracle. I'm paraphrasing him. Yes, of course. I don't understand how anyone can be open in this life and not be in awe of how connections are made when you're paying attention and open to the potential of those connections. And they're all magical and mystical.
Magic is everywhere. It is around us all the time. And it is not magic as in hocus pocus or anything like that. It is the energy of empowerment, of synchronicity, and of the unique ability to generate a field around us that invites and invokes the future in a way that is more than we can currently experience.
I agree with that. However, I can make us disappear and make us come back. That's magic. And I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who once said that magic is simply technology that we don't understand.
And so that technology could be the technology of the universe itself, right? We don't understand the way. So experience is magic, right? Okay. So good, you guys. Thank you. All right. Maura says, Rick often talks about finding the hum in the chart, and perhaps Steve looks for something similar. Do they have any insights about working their way to that gotcha moment when they can lock into the part of the chart that intrigues them or snags their attention? Or is there any insight you can give about what kind of grabs your attention or how it grabs your attention that might be helpful to newer students who are reading charts?
There is no one point, planet, or indicator in a chart that grabs me like that. But what does happen for me is that in more than half of the readings, at some stage during the reading, the pattern, the aspect pattern, it becomes more than three-dimensional. And I dive into the rabbit hole and I just feel the flow of the aspects. And then when I'm in there, I know safely that I can open my mouth and exactly the right words will come out, even when I don't know what I'm about to say. And I realize how paradoxical that sounds, but I trust that. And the only reason I have that is because of 40 years plus, 45 years of doing readings. So I'm sure that Rick can identify this. His language might be different.
Yeah, no, I concur with that. And when I began, for probably the first 10 or 20 years that I did charts, I was totally resistant to saying things that I couldn't peg exactly in the chart. And I began to realize that every now and then I would say things that just came from somewhere, and more than not, they were the most impactful things that I said. And I just learned over the years that looking at a chart and finding that place where all of a sudden things seem to hum, my word, that you just go with it. But there's something else here also about favorite planet or looking for the meaning. Many of the listeners here on Astrology Hub got a collection of my poems on the fundamentals that we taught. I taught 5 years ago or so here, and there was a poem called Radios. And in that poem, it basically, talks about how the planets talk, about how they sing, about how they create melody. And yet we pick up a radio and we look for the magic of the music inside the radio. It's not there. And the magic of the planets is not in Mars. It's not in Venus. And the negative aspect is not in Saturn. That is the mistake. What happens is that somehow all of these planets combine to create a symphony that we hum our own lives to, or that we dance to, even though we don't hear the low frequency music of the spheres. But no, I don't think it's about any one planet. And I do not have a favorite planet. Well, I do, but it changes hour to hour, day to day, week to week, depending upon what I'm doing or what I wish I didn't have to do in that moment.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a question from Catherine. What advice would you share to the next generation of astrologers coming up right now? How can we, new astrologers, best adapt to using all the new technologies still developing over this decade while still honoring and staying true to the astrological tradition?
That was a keynote talk I gave at the conference last weekend. It was called Astrology in the 21st Century, embracing the new while respecting the tradition. It's more than a sentence or two. There's a lot to be gleaned from the old traditions. However, we live in a very different world right now. And it's really important to understand the difference of where we are now versus where we were a couple of thousand years ago versus where we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years. And it's going to happen that quick, where in 10 or 15 years, astrologers are going to look back at the astrology that Steve and I are doing today, that we're all doing today, and go, can you believe those idiots? They were using charts on flat pieces of paper, and way more than that. There's so much more to it than that. The change is big.
25, 30 years ago, myself and Rick, when we were drawing up charts, we were doing them by hand, calculating from the ephemeris, using the acceleration on the interval, working out the time differences by hand, because the computers were either not there or not known about. And nowadays, I would always say that I've always said that if you can't do a chart by hand, then you're not an astrologer. But in this day and age, that's becoming less relevant. You say to me, what's the best way for people to sort of honor the traditions of the past, but advance into the future with astrology? I would say to you, as I say to every one of my students, the only way is practice. Doing charts, doing readings.
And again, there's many different types of astrologers, meaning that there are very capable astrologers who don't do individual chart readings, but do history. That still is astrology. Mm-hmm. There are astrologers who use it to do financial analysis. I know you recently, have had Ray Merriman on. Competent astrologers. But I do think that regardless of what kind of astrology you're doing, whatever your interest, whatever your area of expertise is looking at the correlations again and again and again and again, whether it's sitting one-to-one with a client, or whether it's looking at history, whether it's applying what's up there and what's down here somehow are connected. How do I learn how to deepen and widen my perceptions on correlating those two different spheres that seem to be disconnected and yet astrologically are one and the same?
Okay. Mary is wondering, in practical terms, how do you use astrology in your life? How has it shifted over time from when you were new to astrology to now? Do you look at your transits? Do you plan ahead? Do you ever worry about upcoming transits? Or do you just go with the flow and only check your chart if something noteworthy happens? I'm just so curious.
Well, Steve has a sun trine Saturn, so if you want a practical answer, let him answer.
I used to really worry. And then for 30 years, I was looking in the ephemeris. Oh yeah, Pluto's going to pass opposite my sun in 2013. And I was looking at that in the late 70s and then the early 80s. And I was thinking, 30 years away. And then I got into 2000s, so that, oops. And then I got to the point, I was like, and I survived. I thrived. And now I don't look at the ephemeris and I get worried by anything, because I just see everything as both a challenge and an opportunity. And it's a mindset as to which way you choose to work with it. And I choose to work with it in as positive and hopeful and down to earth way as possible. So everything is a window of opportunity to me, but that's my mindset. I'm not encouraging other people. Other people can choose to be depressed or gloomy about a Saturn transit if they want. I mean, it's their choice, you know.
And he has a Sagittarius moon.
I'm an upbeat person, you know. I like to try to be.
Yeah, I think for me, certainly it has changed as I have changed. And I think that very early on, I thought astrology was just a really cool and clever party game. You know, it seemed cool. And then I began understanding astrology's connection to Jung and Jungian psychology, which I was a psychology student in college and was intending to be a Jungian analyst. And as I began to realize that and began to realize astrology's place not in the history of astrology, but in the history of the Western mind and in the world, in the intellect itself, I began to realize how important astrology was. And I don't spend a lot of time I know my chart, and I know when planets are, moving around, I kind of know where they are. But we were in the car yesterday and I was looking at a chart and I went, Saturn's at 16 degrees of Pisces. That's exactly trine my moon. I hadn't thought about it, but it made sense once I did. And so I think that, for me, I have a lot of planets in Aries and a lot of cardinal planets. And I'm reminded of at the time, there was an 11-year-old daughter of a good friend of mine. He was a Methodist minister. And we used to talk about astrology all the time. And she was a very sharp young woman, young gal. And she was also a brilliant baseball player. She played on a boys' little league team at that time, was unheard of. And she played shortstop. And she said one night when we were talking, she said, if I'm playing in the infield and I'm thinking that this pitcher pitches this way, that batter's left-handed, there's someone on first, I need to play to second base. And then she goes, if I go in my head, I will stumble, I'll miss the ball, I'll throw it to the wrong place. And then she said, but if I'm just there, I never miss. And there's something about astrologers who won't go to the bathroom until the moon is trying their genitals or whatever, that I find particularly ridiculous and maybe even offensive. Not that I would try to change it in them, but I really think that we as humans can end up spending too much time in this analysis place. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many people I know who have wasted so much time stressing over their Saturn return looming or over Pluto opposing the sun. And I can't say that I've not ever done that, but it's a waste of energy.
It is.
There's nothing inherently good or bad about any aspect. It's all about what we do in our immediate life and how the present moment is always informing the future, not just under a powerful transit.
So Mel says, these two in a room together is absolutely wild. Curious what they think or see about a change in workforce and work culture since AI is here and will continue to shift things. I'm in the nonprofit arts sector and feel the need to switch to a more secure and stable role. Will the arts survive? Will there be 9-to-5 office jobs in the future? I'm only 44 and have a while to go before I can retire, if I even can. I'm a big Virgo, so I worry and overthink, and work has been on my mind with AI, etc. Thanks.
Yours.
Everything's going to change. First of all, retirement's for wimps. Why do you want to retire? Right? All you end up doing is watching daytime television and playing golf. Right? Secondly, The whole nature of work as we've understood it is also going to be one of those things that's going to absolutely change. And it's not going to be like the way they've always said it is, oh, you get a lot more leisure time. And don't worry, AI will look after everything. It's going to augment, help, and improve. And as a result, we're going to become more effective, efficient, and focused. So we will have more time for what we really want to do. But at the same time, the urge to get out there and do something that contributes to the community, that benefits ourselves, the whole idea of retirement and pensions and the money, this is one of the big things that's got to change. Because everything is based so far in this last 2,000 years around the idea of profit and greed. That is what's going to change. That's going to upset a lot of people, I know. But hey.
Yeah, and I would say that we have as much to worry about AI as we do about the invention of the cotton gin or the printing press or electricity or Morse code or radio or TV or computers or anything. I mean, look, there's not a way that today you can make a living making barrels. But for hundreds of years, that was an apprenticeship and a lifestyle of people who made barrels or wheels or, whatever. And yes, things are changing. Does that mean you should go out and change your job? Look, you're talking to someone who I haven't had it, and Steve, I'm sure the same. I haven't had a 9-to-5 job in about 40 years. I mean, I've worked hard through those 40 or 50 years. But the idea of working for someone else and being paid a wage is maybe perhaps going to go away, just like an agrarian lifestyle did with the invention and the development of cities and the need for either colonialism and or greedy capitalism. These are big things that will shift. And yes, there will be collateral damage, as there always is in evolution. Is that something to be afraid of? No, it's something to be totally excited about, because who knows what the opportunities are. And if you think that AI and or ASI, which is really the important thing, that's, rather than artificial intelligence, it's artificial superintelligence, which will come in right on the heels. If you think artificial superintelligence is going to be a game stopper, it's going to allow creativity and art and music to take on levels of proportion that we can't even imagine.
And it's not going to replace human consciousness or our attachment to divinity, spirituality, or the essence of the universe.
Unless you're afraid to grow and or be flexible and move with it. I mean, there are a lot of people who are trying to, throw out fear around, Gemini, Chat GPT, Copilot, all these things. And yet these are tools not any different than than having a printed book in the 1500s.
To quote Terence McKenna, who's one of the very few heroes I don't have, right? We've lived for 2,000 years in a dominator culture where the elite have sought to dominate us either through various control systems, whether it be political or economic or religious. And the use of fear has been the single biggest tool of a dominator culture. Fear of a future, fear of something positive coming in. The job of astrologers is
fear
to try
of not having.
Fear of not having,
yeah.
And perhaps one of the roles of the astrologer in the 21st century is to do our best to help other individuals negate that fear within themselves, become more empowered and more open to the possibilities of what they can aspire to and achieve, and then become better human beings. And then that ripple effect will go everywhere. And that'll be the end of the dominator culture. And it's not going to happen in our lifetimes, but it's going to happen.
Okay. If you could say one thing to this beautiful, amazing community that we have of budding astrologers, hobbyist astrologers, professional astrologers, or just astrologically curious, as we move into this time of great change, what would be the thing that you would want to share with them?
Goodbye.
Don't leave.
What do I say? Practice, practice, practice. And never stop trying. You're not being asked to be successful. You're being asked to do your best. And the only person who can tell you what your best is you. Just do your best.
I would say that what I would tell people is that the universe is unfolding exactly as it should. And yet we have the ability to interact with that on a moment by moment by moment basis. And it's not about what happens to us at any given moment, because there are horrific stories and realities out there. I mean, there's a concept in Buddhism that sometimes is referred to as this precious life. All life is precious, but it's a rare lifetime when you have the ability to sit like this and think about what it might be that we could use to be happier or more aware or more productive, rather than getting that 5,000-pound weight off of our foot so we could move, rather than having to worry about how we were going to feed our starving kids or our sick, whatever. And so from that standpoint, what I would tell people is to know that karma is not what happened in the past that's giving you crap now. It's what you happened. It's what you do right now in reaction or response to whatever it is that's going on that then ripples into the future. We can't change the future, but we can change the present moment by reconstructing the framework, which is what astrology gives us the power to do, of where we are, that gives us more choices in the present moment. And it's the choices that we make in the present moment that can alter our trajectory, sometimes ever so slightly. But remember, that's what yoga is. And I don't mean being in a posture. I mean, the word asana in Sanskrit is not about sitting in a posture. It's about taking an attitude. And an attitude, like from a sailing point of view, is how much you lean into the wind, because if you don't lean into the wind, you don't get any movement. And if you lean too far, you go over. And so it's a matter of how do you work with that energy in a way that allows you to steer the ship regardless of which way the wind is blowing.
And that, in exact regard to that very last sentence, as I've said to you before, people don't find astrology. Astrology finds people. And that gives astrology valence and life force. And if astrology has found the students and the aspirants and the practitioners that you're talking about, then they must have something worth working with, because astrology is selective of who she wants to work with. I'm biased.
And with that, your time is up.
Oh my God, you guys, thank you so much. This has been so amazing. I would love at some point, actually, my dream would be that the next time we do this, we're all together. The three of us. We can be in an awesome studio and we're all together, because that would be the best.
Let's dream it in.
Yes.
It's a deal, if not a date yet.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I loved filming it. Now, the montage of absolutely classic outtakes is coming up next, so make sure you stick around. In the meantime, we didn't discuss this in the episode, but the reason that Rick and Steve were together is because Steve was interviewing Rick for his upcoming documentary on Western astrology. Now, Steve is producing this show as a legacy piece, and it is bound to be a masterpiece. He is funding most of it out of his own pocket, and so we wanted to make it easy for you if you're interested in supporting Steve's work and this documentary coming to life. We have set up a page where you can actually donate to Steve's documentary. 100% of your contribution goes right through to Steve, and we've already been able to raise over $1,700 from this community. Thank you so much. I know Steve is so grateful, and we're so grateful for your generosity as well. You can go to astrologyhub.com/Steve and make any contribution of any dollar amount that you'd like. We're also going to put that link in the show notes. And don't forget about your opportunity to learn intimately from Steve as part of our Inner Circle membership for just $1 for your first month. Remember, you'll also get the bonus mastery class from Rick Levine on Mercury when you become a full member at 50% off the normal membership rate at the end of your dollar trial. You can go to astrologyhub.com/inner circle to learn more and join us for that dollar trial today. The outtakes are up next. I want to thank you for tuning into this episode, for being a part of our community, and as always, for making astrology a part of your life. Enjoy these guys. They're classic.
Careful what you're saying. We're being recorded.
One of us doesn't talk as much as the other. Although I have had some interesting dreams about him.
I don't want to know what they are either.
It was something
Don't go there.
It involved a lot of hair. I always thought my weirdness was down to my Mars-Uranus conjunction. Now
That helps. Rick Levine, what kind of asshole are you? Steve's been trying to get in touch with you, but he was out of town, so why would I email him back? Anyhow.
Oh my God. You into Buddhism?
On alternate Thursdays and Tuesday afternoons. Yeah, sure.
I'm ranting again, aren't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ranting.